Welcome to Team Talk. I'm delighted to have Victoria Bell join us today. Victoria is an award-winning bank-registered nutritionist, but that's not all. I know we are talking today about unlocking wellness in the workplace. Victoria's promised to share a few secrets and tips that leaders might not know. Before we dive into that really important topic, Victoria, there's quite a few strings to your bow. Do you want to introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, James, and hi everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as well as the nutritional therapy, which I work one-to-one with clients in private practice, so things like IBS and perimenopause and general health, and then more these days I work with workplaces to provide workshops, talks, consultations for the employees. As well as that, I am a breathwork coach and have a few other strings to my bow. So things like mental health, first aid, yin yoga, mindfulness, and constantly adding new things.
Fantastic. So yeah, I guess you're going to come to wellness from quite a well-rounded position with all that experience.
Yeah, and from personal experience, because before retraining, I worked in corporates for many years and went through burnout. So my own point of view is there are lots of people doing amazing jobs in the workplace, and we don't want those people to burn out. So let's see what we can do to help people look after themselves a bit better.
Excellent. Let's come on to that later and see what tips you can give people to avoid burnout, because I'm sure many suffer or are on the edge of that. Let's go right. Let's start right from the top. I know when we spoke the other day, you shared some quite alarming stats. So, why should a leader focus on their team's health?
So there are so many reasons, and I can list things like productivity, absenteeism. I'm not sure how many people have heard of presenteeism, where people are working through illness as well. But there are some quite interesting numbers and hidden costs behind those effects of ill health in the workplace. So, as an example, in an annual study that is done, the hidden cost was estimated at around £103 billion for employers in the UK each year. And that tends to go up every year that they do these studies. Then of that 103 billion, about 24 billion of that would be presenteeism. So people in work and just not being very effective and maybe making mistakes or just on a go slow. And finally, the other stat is the mental health cost. Of the 103, 51 billion would be mental health effects on people's work performance. And that involves things like what's going on in the workplace, but it also brings in what's going on in their personal lives, working parents, and all sorts of other things going on around.
Wow, those numbers are really surprised me. So there's some quite high costs of not looking at this, both financial for the business and in the terms of welfare for your team, because most good employees would want to look after their staff, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. And I think within any organisation, it's really hard to actually quantify these costs, because you can't really compare, well, what would our bottom line look like if everybody was running at full capacity, because it just doesn't exist. So we can't actually see the potential unless we put into practice some of the wellness strategies that then improve productivity and presence in the workplace.
Difficult to see the cost, but I guess easier to realise the opportunity when you start doing some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the studies that has been done, it suggests that the return on investment for any wellbeing support for employees is about £4.70 per pound invested. So there's a lot of potential for a return on that.
Yeah, well, that's nearly a 5-to-1. That sounds pretty good to me. And I guess you've also got to overlay that in the context of the world that we operate in. So beyond the financial side, it's often difficult to find staff at the moment. So treating the ones and looking after and making them want to stay because of the environment is increasingly important for a lot of business leaders, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm sure you might be seeing similar things, and other leaders that are watching this, that especially younger candidates are more selective, and they're looking at flexible working and other things, and they're being more discerning about whether or not they want to work with the employer, whether the employer's a good fit for them, rather than whether they're a good fit for the employer. So we've got to try and be a bit forward thinking in making it more attractive for that talent potentially.
Yeah, very, very much. And I guess one of the challenging questions is a bit of an elephant in the room. So I'll come out and say it. Well, when it comes to productivity, I guess there's a number of factors affecting that. And how do I distinguish as a leader between whether the person is just lazy, I'm gonna use the term, or they have another effect, a health-related factor affecting? How do I manage that sort of challenge as a leader?
That's a really good question. So there's a few different facets to that, and one comes down to the hiring process, and of course making sure that the person is appropriate for the role and the role is appropriate for the person. Looking at the working arrangements, are they reasonable for this person to excel at their job? And then one of the things that has shown up in some of these annual studies is that a lot of managers lack confidence in being able to discuss health or what might be underlying any performance issues.
Yeah.
And then what to do if the employee does share what's going on for them, and if there is, perhaps say a mental health concern or something else going on. So I guess one of the keys would be making sure that leaders feel confident in being able to have those discussions and explore what might be going on. And one thing I read this week is people aren't inherently lazy. Of course, we have people that will like to always take the easy road and so on, but generally people that go to work, it's like the NLP philosophy that nobody does a bad job on purpose. There's always something
Absolutely.
going on.
Yeah.
So it's hard for leaders to kind of spot the difference, but I think once you've got that training and knowledge to ask the right questions and make sure that you know what the difference is between underperforming, because they're disengaged, or they've checked out, or is it something that can be helped within the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can come down. First of all, thank you, Victoria, for bringing me back to the fact that people are generally not lazy, and I think it often comes down to how well a leader knows their team. Now, it doesn't have to be complicated things, does it? It's just about asking something about them personally, a level of relationship at that level. Then you're far more likely to realise whether they are doing something that's out of character.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, things can be unexpected, things can change. And one of the other findings is that a lot of employees are actually quite nervous and feel quite unsafe about being honest about what's going on, if they feel like they might be penalised, or that their employers might then hold them back from promotions, or there might be some kind of consequence for them underperforming. For example, neurodivergent employees, if they say, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, they might worry that they then it will always be assumed that they're going to mess up, for example, because, they've got this, cognitive issue that might make them have some problems. But actually, when we put the right adjustments in place to support everybody to thrive, then that's all avoidable in a way.
Absolutely, and it's your right, isn't it, and the employee's responsibility in those situations to make reasonable adjustments.
Correct. Yes.
There's loads of factors affecting productivity. I know you did a presentation the other week, and there was stuff like poor diet and obesity, lack of physical activity. The list went on. What else was in the list? Remind me, Victoria.
I've got notes because I can't remember everything off my
That's
head.
okay.
So some of the other things, so people with musculoskeletal problems, for example, so things like back pain, hips, any kind of joint pain, they will be constantly slightly on edge about whatever pain issues they might have. So, for example, desk sitting all day might be a problem, or they might need adjustments to their desk space to help them, or time for physiotherapy, or seeing the right practitioner to actually relieve the pain. Fatigue is very common, and there are lots of chronic conditions that can cause people to have long-term fatigue, like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. But then in general, if people are exhausted from things going on in life, or poor nutrition and all the other factors that you just listed off, then all that can contribute to fatigue. And burnout, like we said before, is a really common one. And the thing with burnout is, so we are designed to have certain amounts of stress, and we function really well because stress actually causes us to problem solve and come up with ways of doing things, to actually strive for something, to avoid
Yeah, a little bit of
pain.
positive pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of positive pressure. And I think I heard one of your other guests talk about homeostasis and the, sort of the balance of stress levels. And of course, burnout is when somebody is going over that balance of positive stress into negative stress, distress, too much of the time. And a lot of these people actually are real high performers, and they
Yeah.
they actually over deliver, a perfectionist, overwork, people pleasers, all that sort of thing. Maybe have poor boundaries and just say yes to everything. And under the surface, they're like the swan with the feet pedaling away, and they can't see that internally the stress hormones are just circulating much more than they should, but the body can only carry that on for so long. So then these symptoms of illness and disease and exhaustion, they can start to creep in. And it can go from just catching colds more regularly and just being a bit flat, to suddenly not being able to get out of bed, losing all enthusiasm for a job that they previously loved. Those are some of the warning signs.
Look, you've been through this. You've been through this yourself without going too personal, sharing anything you don't want to share. I'm presuming it's relatively difficult to see it for yourself when you're in it. So how do you what advice could you give to people to notice they are heading towards it, or actually in a burnout kind of situation?
So when I went through burnout, I didn't know what burnout actually was. I'd heard the phrase, but I worked in finance and HR previously. And so in the moment, I didn't know what was going on. I just felt really inadequate because I'd been one of those high performers and, a workaholic. And suddenly I was struggling to get out of bed. And I was, sort of very reactive, and everything was the last straw. But for people now, I think, because this is quite a few years ago, there's more knowledge. So, of course, workplaces are doing so much more to help employees support their mental well-being and be aware of, the difference between having a little bit of stress and edging towards that,
Yeah.
distress. So the sorts of things that people can do is, where possible, create some kind of daily check-ins. So it could be just a few minutes of solitude and, some quiet breathing, or, it may be a short mindfulness track. It may be journaling. Some people like to write. It may just be getting out and spending time with people, but just noticing how you feel and how you're responding to your environment. And then, of course, in the bigger picture, things like looking after your nutrition, looking after your sleep, making sure that you do have a reasonable work-life balance. And if there is a busy phase at work, how can you make sure that you're looking after your body and
Mm.
that you plan in some rest time when you can. So there's lots of different things that people can do. But I think also for colleagues, checking in on each other, or for managers or leaders, sort of being able to spot those subtle changes and check in with teams as well.
Yeah, I think it's good to, I can't remember, I read it the other day, that everyone should have a friend at work. And sometimes you need that person that maybe it's not your boss. I'm not taking any responsibility away from leaders, but, by saying that, but some people are just more comfortable in speaking to someone else, checking in with someone else, a buddy or whatever you'd like to call it, in terms of their health.
Absolutely. And I saw this when I used to work in my last company. The CEO had me manage his PA because he just wasn't good with all the soft stuff. So I did all the actual managing, and he just sent her all the mad things he needed doing. But yeah, it definitely can
You
be.
just think that sounds like a bit of an abdication on his part.
Well, he was
I
the
said it,
ideal
not you. Okay.
man. Yeah, so I think within teams we can raise more awareness in general, that everybody can sort of check in with colleagues, and it doesn't even need to be everybody gets assigned a buddy. I think knowing the personalities in the team as well, and going, well, these are the people that are more sort of nurturing and more have higher emotional intelligence or whatever it might be. So maybe kind of leveraging that and working with them to help them to be the sort of the ears on the ground for the managers as well.
Yeah, nice touch. And I guess when you were in it, because going from quite an ambitious, successful person to being in this state where you find it difficult to get up. How did you feel?
Awful.
I can imagine.
I was tanked up on caffeine. I was drinking a ridiculous amount, and I would fly into the office like just overcompensating. I'm kind of an ambivert, so I'm not an extrovert, I'm not an introvert, I'm sort of a mix of the two. But I was really like trying to show, look, I'm here. I'm still kind of firing all cylinders, and yeah, just piling in lots of extra hours to make up for the fact that I wasn't functioning as well. But it does feel awful. There are so many people
And I
that
guess
have been
that compounds the fact, is that probably makes you more tired and makes it worse, does it?
yeah, it was really exhausting. So I did at one point, I lost my voice for 12 days. I had to have speech therapy because I've got permanent damage to my larynx.
My
Uh,
God.
and fortunately, I did have a really lovely boss at the time, but she banished me from the office. I had to work from home to stop talking.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just
Yeah.
work through every illness. But I think that's the thing, when people are going through it, until you hit that real last stage of, I just cannot raise any enthusiasm for, just completely switching off. I think people are just clinging on and
Mm.
trying to like salvage, this career they've worked so hard to build, and once you can actually do something about that, and start to work on supporting your adrenals, for example, which make your stress hormones, improving your nutrition, getting the sleep and so on, there is a route back to normality, but it might just have it might involve a new normal.
What was the turning point for you?
So I actually had to leave my previous career because once I returned after having two children, the workplace at the time didn't have the right arrangements for flexible working or part-time working. So I took some time out, which sometimes I look back and think, oh, I had such a good career and I do miss it. But for me at that moment in time, it made more sense to just focus on the family, and I retrained. But in another universe, maybe I would have liked to have got myself back on my feet and worked on my health and all the things that I didn't know, which I obviously know through my training now. But there just wasn't, at that time, there wasn't anybody there to spot those signs, or I just had to find it all out for myself, really, which hopefully
But I'm
these days.
sure there are people in this position right now. So looking at this on the positive side, it's great that you can really, that you've had that experience. Not great that you've had it, but you can really empathise with people who are going through this. More importantly, and a lot of what Team Talk is about, is to benefit from that kind of hindsight. So what tips would you give yourself, i.e. the individuals in it, to try and break out of it, firstly?
So first of all, because everything can feel really overwhelming. So the big jobs of sorting your diet out, or starting new habits, can feel so overwhelming. So I would start really small, and it might be something like using an app that helps you to focus on your breathing for, even just 2 minutes to start with. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be, 15, 20 minutes. Just start really small, and maybe tell somebody who really cares, that can be your sort of accountability buddy.
nice.
Just make sure somebody knows you're trying to do this for yourself, and that you need a bit of a cheerleader to help you remember to keep doing it. And then with things like self-care tasks, because some people are struggling to even just keep on top of their hygiene, or home, looking after their clothes and things like that, remembering to feed themselves properly, planning food. Wherever you can, get some help, because this won't be forever, as long as you do make some changes. And it can feel really difficult to ask for help, but once
I can
people know
imagine.
how they can help, they're actually generally more than happy to do that and be of use and help you to recover. So it may be for a while getting somebody to help you to plan your meals out, or ordering in. There are companies that can send you nutritionally balanced meals that you just take out of the fridge or the freezer every day, and then you've got at
Yeah,
least one or two decent meals a day. Maybe hiring somebody to help you do the laundry, or just wherever you can, get some help. And just 2 or 3 things, once you've mastered that, 2 minutes to yourself, 5 minutes, and so on, they will start to make you feel a bit better, and then you'll start to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and then you can build the bigger things later on.
yeah. I can imagine that is asking for help is probably one of the hardest elements, particularly if somebody is like you, they're a strong, independent woman, they're doing well in their career, and they're going to be feeling, hang on, I can't deliver as much, I'm not as effective as I used to be. Those kind of thoughts going through your head. Maybe the last thing you want to admit is you need help.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially at work. So at work, you may find, you want to keep it quiet. And if you've got a good manager, a good leader, then you hopefully will have full support to actually start to turn things around. But it may be that it's in your personal life that you focus there, find one or two dependable people who you can trust, and get their support. And if you can't, if you don't feel like you've got anybody around you that is that person, in the short term, if money can allow, it would be worth getting a coach, or getting a therapist to work with you, or even things like monthly going for a massage, which things like that are really good for tuning down the nervous system in terms of that
Yeah.
fight and flight. And so it may just be things like that that start to help your nervous system resume a bit of normal time, really.
And what about from the leaders, for the bosses' perspective? It sounds like you had a good boss at the time that did things like sent you home so you didn't have to speak to people. What can they do? What can they notice? How could they see and therefore help you in the best way?
So one of the things that can be helpful is mental health first aid training. And I recently did this myself. That there's a nationwide organisation where you can go and look it up. It's MHFA UK. Anywhere you can do online courses. There's probably in-person ones, and that can give you a really good grounding for noticing what mental health or mental ill health looks like, and where the boundaries are between what can a manager or a leader do, and when should they signpost, and put that
Yeah.
person in touch with somebody, because more often than not, it's not about fixing the problem for the manager. They aren't there to change whatever the problem is, unless it is overloaded with their work. And can there be a redistribution, or can there be more flexible working hours? Can they have a bit more freedom to take time out to see a counsellor, or can they make up the hours somehow, so they can do things where needed. But more often it's actually this person does need to speak to a family member about what's going on, or there is a charity that provide free guidance for that particular issue. So the mental health first aid training gives managers confidence that they don't need to do all the things, but they know how to get that person to get the right help.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I have done it. I'm no expert in that field, but I guess one of the outtakes for me when I did it was just a realization of my own limitations within that field. So knowing when not to step in, and when then to signpost to a resource, or bring on the relevant expert, be that a doctor or a therapist or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that, again, it comes back to that confidence of knowing, what's yours and what's for somebody else to take over.
Yeah, and I think there's there's a massive challenge between what you observe and then what you might talk about as a leader. So let's give a really stupid, simple example. I don't know. You might notice somebody that's really fatigued and is eating all the right things. It would probably be inappropriate for you to go and tell them they're eating the wrong things, because that's their business, isn't it? It's not. It's not your role as a leader to be doing that. It's quite insulting to the person.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all human. So I'm sure I've put my foot in it in the past and said the wrong thing to a colleague. And the intention is well meant. But that's where bringing in a nutritionist or, other experts into the workplace and providing that guidance can take the pressure off the manager to offer suggestions or solutions. But the typical way to address things with an employee, more than I do about managerial techniques. And, if you just point out where somebody's making mistakes or those sorts of things, then that person's already on the defensive. But
Absolutely, yeah.
if you can find a way in and just say, I can't help but notice you've been a bit quiet recently, or, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you haven't been yourself lately. Is there anything going on? And approaching it that way rather than pointing out, things that, maybe right in front of your face, but are a bit
Yeah, I
indelicate.
mean, you can. I think there remains a duty to the leader to say something. Otherwise, it's a bit like somebody observing somebody being bullied. You're witnessing it, but not doing anything. Maybe the simplest thing, if the leader is unsure of what to say and they haven't done health training or they haven't got an expert at his hand, it's just your standard kind of, how are you? How's the work going on? Is there anything I can help you with, or is there any challenges at the moment? Because you keep it right at a level, but you've created the opportunity. If they're ready to actually impart more information about how they're feeling, you've created that environment.
Absolutely. And in the mental health first aid training, you see that more often than not, when you ask somebody how they are, they're always going to say initially, I'm fine, or yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's all okay. So you have to sort of then persist a little, because you generally will get, completely sort of shut down on that first
yes,
conversation. So it's just, sort of gently easing your way into that.
that's really good advice, because it's generally, you need to look at how they're saying I'm fine and what's going on in their face or eyes to know whether they're actually just can't be bothered to have the conversation, or it's not the answer that you really need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if it's kind of, for example, a male manager speaking with a female employee or vice versa, if there's something going on that they feel quite difficult talking about, and maybe about, is there a second person that can be the go-to that, is somebody that person will feel comfortable discussing those things with,
Yeah,
depending on what the problem is.
absolutely. Lovely. So let's come on to talk about nutrition, because that's one of your areas of expertise. Let's look at a couple of things that leaders may not know about nutrition. I'm sure you can. Sorry to put you on the spot, Victoria. What comes to your mind? Because I'm sure you have these conversations all the time at the presentations that you deliver for clients and one-to-ones. What kind of things come to mind?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm always fine with like off the beat questions. It's fine. So one of the things would be is it's not necessarily common knowledge that food can either drive disease and conditions, or it can relieve and help to prevent them. And we kind of know that to some extent, but when people have got certain health conditions, it's generally not common knowledge what they can do about it. So if you go to a doctor, the same thing, they generally don't recommend the sort of nutritional adjustments that, nutritionists can suggest. And so for employees, they will often feel helpless with whatever diagnosis they've been given.
Yeah.
But as leaders, if they know they can bring somebody in that can talk about, if it's inflammatory conditions, for example, like arthritis, eczema, polycystic ovary syndrome, whatever, then they can empower their team with knowledge about how to improve their symptoms. So that's one of the things.
On that, everyone's different. If people have got different lifestyle, they'll be eating different things. I can imagine it is quite difficult, perhaps impossible, to give generic nutrition advice. If you've got a team of 20 people, if I lead with 20 people, giving them generic nutritional advice, may not help that much beyond stating some obvious things that they probably already know. What would be the First of all, do you agree with that? If I'm wrong, please state. What's your?
Yeah, there's kind of a yes and a no answer. So, like, yes, because there is no one size fits all. And we know, for example, people have different metabolism types, and, male versus female, sometimes the research that's done is on males when it's actually about menopause and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of variation that can't always be addressed in a talk to everybody, but we can approach it from the point of view that we all are creatures of habit, and we default to type. So if there aren't these regular reminders that, don't forget, actually we need to be drinking lots of water or fluids regularly, that there are these foods that are anti-inflammatory, there are foods that help the brain work, there are foods that help to have a healthy gut, etc. I think a lot of people just carry on in their kind of mode of least resistance.
Okay, yeah. So you could make those cores a lot easier. You could give everyone a cup, put a water fountain in, and something that makes drinking the right amount of water a lot easier. It's going to benefit everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's lots of less well-known pieces of advice that I offer, or where everybody's hearing from multiple sources different advice and different, sometimes dangerous advice as well. So when you bring somebody in who knows what the data really tells us, then you can sort of sort the fact from the fiction, and say these are the things that are helpful, nor ignore all the
What
nonsense.
might be an example of that, Victoria?
So supplements are a particular one. So there are lots of supplements that have been recommended for things like weight loss, like high dose green tea extract, for example, which actually there have been cases of people having liver damage from the amount in the capsules, which weren't properly regulated. There's also things like, now people are into the GLP-1, the injections for weight loss, which isn't necessarily.
I don't know, but thank you for.
It's more of a medical issue, really. But in general, people that are thinking about weight loss are now kind of more inclined to seek out these weight loss injections, which there are some cases of people being harmed or actually some deaths in that instance. And, so knowing that you can actually do much more naturally and safely in those instances would be a better strategy than trying these things out that are kind of a bit sort of hyped up and sensationalized. But yeah, there's loads of instances where people follow advice, but they might have a health condition that then,
Yeah.
gets aggravated by a particular supplement. Or I got called once by, I don't work with eating disorders, but sometimes I have to sort of recognize when somebody is on that sort of spectrum and refer them
Yeah.
on. And I had somebody that got obsessed with eating greens, and she'd actually eaten so many of them. This is quite hard to hard to fathom, but she'd eaten so many of them to the extreme that her body couldn't break down some of the metabolites in those, and
Right.
it kind of caused her to turn orange because she wasn't able to break down the beta carotenes in the greens. And so yeah, people can do themselves a lot of harm
Yeah.
when they
It can go
hear.
too far.
Yeah.
If there was a absolute gold standard, say I was a leader and I got 20 people and money was not an object, and I said, well, I want the best health for my teams. What might that look like?
So you made a point a few minutes ago about there's not a one size fits all. So one of the best things you can offer is those one-to-one consultations where the employees will get very individualized advice and maybe a personalized nutrition plan, that sort of thing. And then offering things like workshops, even team building days, you can sort of bring in some nutrition or like a fun cookery class or something, um, and then weave in maybe mindfulness or yoga session or dance or something. So you can offer lots of different things, but with the workshops you might think, well, we have a lot of women that are kind of in the sort of 40 to 65 bracket, let's look at menopause. Or
Yeah.
we have a lot of men, let's do mental health awareness or a men's health talk. So there's lots of those types of things. And I think not just doing something once and then it being like a tick box, but actually having a strategy. Let's have something once every 2 months or once a month, or somebody that's available for people to see every few weeks. Those kinds of things work really well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot like it won't be within everyone's budget, I know, but
Yeah.
I guess the beauty of having a personal one-to-one for individuals, you've taken all of the onus about the leader. It's totally the individual's choice of what they share with that person and whether they follow the plan on that. But you've done probably all you can as a leader, particularly if you're then reminding them and following up. It's an ongoing thing, not a tick box. I totally get that.
Yeah, and I think with the one-to-one, even the workshops as well, it can be like one change that it then sort of sets off the cascade of other changes. So somebody realizes how much better they feel from having good quality protein, for example, and then they think, goodness, if I can feel like this, how much better can I feel if I do something else? For some people, at that right point in time, that could be like a catalyst for them to make other changes.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a fun little question. It's a bit of a personal one. You were talking about workshops. If I'm running a workshop, I do quite a few. I'm often on that dilemma as like, well, do I go with some chocolate to give people a bit of an energy boost during the workshop, or do I get some fruit in? What would you, if you, what was your advice be to giving some sustenance to keep people going in a workshop?
So yeah, you can actually find things that seem more like treats that are the healthier versions of what's more often offered. So for example, you can get protein balls, energy balls, that sort of thing, or darker chocolate. So even just switch out things like milk chocolate for dark, and can get these things sort of delivered that are essentially handmade, or sort of small batch made out of completely fresh ingredients. there's a lot that you can do without making it too complicated. So there are places online that I would normally recommend to my clients if they wanted to switch out some of their snacks.
Oh, nice. Thank you. I'll have to get in the kitchen. Is there anything else that you think leaders should be heightened in terms of their awareness on from a nutritional perspective?
So the sorts of things that people forget is to remember to drink enough fluids, for example.
Guilty.
So I even see that in my husband. He's like head of treasury somewhere, and even I nag him. But yeah, I think leaders need to make sure that there's access for people to drink regularly, and that another thing is also in terms of working patterns, that studies are now showing that if you only have, say, like a break in the middle of the day and you're working solidly for like several hours at a time, actually people are more productive if they have, say, a 5 minute break every hour or so, just to like move and maybe
Yeah.
get a drink or whatever it might be. And we actually can get more done in a day if we are regularly moving, drinking enough, eating when we need to. And also, in terms of, it's not always easy, but eating lunches and so on, a lot of people are eating and working, or eating on the go, or just like grabbing something from the sort of supermarket near the office. So it's kind of trying to encourage preparing ahead, really, and maybe making something that's in the fridge to take into work when you get up on the day, or thinking about what foods are available in the workplace and how can they improve on those.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing all those tips, your personal story as well. So hopefully we can help some people avoid that, help leaders notice things, and help their teams earlier on. I always ask this question at the end of these things. What book would you recommend for people, Victoria?
So I love a book called The Compassionate Mind by
Okay.
Paul Gilbert, which is not necessarily directly about nutrition, but he does talk about eating habits in there. And what it tells us is, one, about why our monkey brain,
Yeah.
our amygdala, will always drive us into things that make us feel generally quite awful, or we'll constantly be making the same mistakes and all that sort of thing. But when you bring awareness and compassion towards yourself, then it's easier to make the positive changes that are going to improve outcomes in your life. And that can be around eating and lifestyle, but it can be around relationships, work, sort of bigger sort of goals and dreams. So I always recommend that one.
Yeah, no, I like the broader view there, because eating is often an impact of other things going on in your head, isn't it, rather than anything else?
Yeah, generally, because we are all human and we're emotional beings, everybody's got emotional stuff. We've all got conditioning from when we were too small to have language to actually process our experiences. And so we take all this stuff into adulthood. And it's not about necessarily saying, oh, nothing's my fault, but actually recognizing a lot of the reason we are the way we are comes from things before we had any control over any of that. So we can then be kinder to ourselves.
Absolutely. But yeah, so much of that goes on our subconscious, doesn't it? But everyone has the opportunity to take a time out and say, hang on, what am I doing here? What might I want to change?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, with people making changes or wanting to change, you can know all the things about what good nutrition is and should be. But if you don't work on that inner mental and emotional stuff, then it's a lot harder to actually have sustainable changes.
Absolutely. That's a really good place. Yeah, the huge gap between what we know and what we do. It's so in so many areas. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing, Victoria.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.